after going to the Naval War College, I returned to the CIA, and I had a very supportive boss. And he knew that one of my bucket list jobs was to be a PDB briefer. We bring, everything that we know about that subject to the forefront, and we will track those, those storylines, for lack of a better word. And as we get new information and new intelligence, that storyline or that analysis may change. And so one of the big important things that the entire intelligence community does, not just the CIA, is not only identify analysis, but how things change and why they change. This particular congressman or senator wants to know all about this topic. It could be expanded into something that's more.
Hey, before we jump into the podcast, we want to thank all our donors and supporters who make the Today Count show possible. It's through your generosity that we're able to shape leaders through this content and this podcast. And be sure to like, subscribe, and follow wherever you find yourself coming across this content. All right, let's get to the podcast. All statements of fact, opinion, or analysis expressed are those of the author and do not reflect the official position or views of the U.S. government. Nothing in the content should be construed as asserting or implying U.S. government authentication of information or endorsement of the author's views.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Today Count show. And if this is your first time watching or listening, glad that you have joined us and are going to give us a try. Today, I have a special guest on the show. Her name is Stephanie Sellers. I met her by way of another lady that I met in France. And this is a very interesting one. This lady's got education and experience in things that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to read her short bio. And as I do that, it is a mouthful. So I almost thought that I should practice it, but I'm not going to practice it. But here we go. Her name is Miss Stephanie Sellers, and Stephanie most recently served as the Central Intelligence Agency, as of course we all know as CIA, representative to the U.S. Army War College, and the General Walter Bedell Smith Chair of National Intelligence Studies. Woo! I got through that sentence. Ms. Sellers has over 27 years of experience in the U.S. government as an intelligence educator, tradecraft facilitator, analytic manager, military analyst, science and technology analyst, and missile system engineer. I don't even know what some of that is. But anyway, from 2018 to 2019, she served as the president's daily brief, otherwise known as the PDB, briefer to the president's daily briefer to the Secretary of Defense, Deputy Secretary of Defense, and Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence. Before joining the CIA, Ms. Sellers served as a Department of the Navy civilian aerospace engineer, where she directed program operations, developed hardware, and conducted thermostructural stress and flight dynamic analysis simulations on re-entry of vehicles for the Navy's Trident submarine launched ballistic missile system. This is crazy. Ms. Sellers holds a Bachelor of Mechanical and Aerospace Engineering from the University of Dayton, Master of Science and professional degrees in Aerospace Engineering from the George Washington University, a Master of Arts in National Security and Strategic Studies from the U.S. Naval War College, and a certificate in leadership coaching for organizational development from George Mason University. In May, she completed an education policy fellowship with the Education Policy and Leadership Center. She teaches trauma-informed yoga to support recovery and resilience among veterans, military families, and communities, particularly those working through PTSD. She enjoys spending free time with her 4 children, sons 16 and 15, and daughters 11 and 9. Woo, Stephanie, that's a lot. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, you must be a driven lady. That's all I can say. Were you
Probably a fair statement.
Were you kind of nerdy in high school, or what?
I was really nerdy in high school. Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's awesome.
I can own that now, I suppose.
Well, most of us civilians and lay people, we have we certainly know about the CIA. We like to watch movies, all based upon all of that kind of stuff, espionage and all that crazy thing. And we've also, I would think most of us, have heard about this briefing, but I think that our listeners would be interested to. I mean, we have certain assumptions, but very few of us get involved in that. So, what is a brief? Where does it? How is the information gathered? How is it filtered? How is it simulated? Can you just tell us a story about that? It'd be a great place to start, I think.
Sure. Absolutely. Well, again, thanks for having me, Jim. I'm really excited to be here. Um, I might start with how I became a briefer because I kind of think that it flows into the story of what a briefer does, if that's all right with you. I came into the agency, as you mentioned, back in 2003 after working for the Navy for a bit. And one of my colleagues was a PDB briefer. And so I thought, okay, well, this is really interesting, right? And she was briefing the director at the time. So after going to the Naval War College, I returned to the CIA and I had a very supportive boss. And he knew that one of my bucket list jobs was to be a PDB briefer. And so I asked him, or so he kept an eye out for, the vacancy notices. And one day he, said, hey, come to my office. You're going to be really interested in this. And there was an opportunity to apply to be Vice President Pence's briefer. And I was like, oh gosh, I can't do that. No, that's scary. Right. Like, I think it would have been phenomenal, but I was terrified. And I said, no, I'm going to wait till the Secretary of Defense briefer comes out. That's what I've always wanted to do. I worked for the Defense Department. I worked for the agency. And he just kind of looked at me and he said, do you want to be comfortable or do you want to be challenged? And I thought, ooh, that's really good. I've never forgotten that. And so I said, well, of course, I want to be challenged, right? You read my bio. And so I applied for the job, and about maybe 6 weeks later, so I got a call, and the answer was, "Hey, sorry, you didn't get the job, but would you like to work or would you like to brief the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence and the Deputy Secretary of Defense?" And I thought, oh wow, this is like a great match. And then eventually, the deputy that I had flighted up to become the Secretary of Defense or acting Secretary of Defense, and I can talk a little bit more about that detail if you'd like, but basically, so that's kind of
I've got all kinds of questions. So
okay.
keep
So
going.
that's kind of how I got into being a briefer. And so, you kind of ask a bit about like who gets the PDB, and a lot of questions I always get are, is the content the same for every recipient?
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Yep. So the PDB is tailored to the specific needs and preferences of each of its recipients, right? So PDB customers change depending on the administration. The frequency and delivery of the PDB are determined by the president and the DNI, the Director for National Intelligence, and they are working together in a partnership to ensure that this briefing every day meets the needs of the administration. And so likewise, the distribution of that product is at the discretion of the president and the DNI. And it's typically provided to senior policymakers within the National Security Council or the NSC. I apologize in advance if I use a lot of acronyms. It's a very CIA and military thing to do. And a key feature of the PDB is its commitment to providing all of the same intelligence to all the NSC principals. So that means every decision maker is looking at the same information, right? And you could extrapolate that to any type of business or any type of career field, right? You want those people that are making the decisions to all be on the same page. And so in addition to receiving PDB articles, each customer will get a tailored briefing based on the policy, which includes additional intelligence reporting and analysis. So that's kind of, like a very brief, how do you become a briefer, and then who gets the PDB briefer, and how do they receive it? I think that's another question that I always get. Right. So PDB briefers are the voice of the intelligence community with the executive level decision makers of the administration. They serve as the primary link between various components within the intelligence community and the CIA and the president, and as well as the senior officials in the administration. And so normally it's about a 1 to 2 year tour. It really just depends, again, on the briefer, the administration, and who they're briefing. But PDB briefers play a really critical role in informing these high-level decision makers. And so contributing to that national security, the complex global dynamics that we look at. Every customer takes their briefing differently. Some like to read, some like to ask questions, some just want a short briefing. As with my case, when I was asked, do you want to apply for this position? And I did. And then they said, well, you didn't get that position. Do you want this? The office that does that matching does a really good job matching briefers with the policymaker customers, because really at the end of the day, intelligence is a relationship business. I think I went a little off track, but I hope I answered the question.
No. This is great. So, is there an original source document and then it is dissected from there, or I mean, how does this? I'm just trying to think of some efficiencies. And is this a daily briefing? Does daily mean 7 days a week, 365 days a year? But is there an original source document, and then is that exegeted, into different directions? How does that work?
Sure. So the PDB itself is a compilation of, a typical number of documents, or I'm sorry, a set number of documents. And that set number of documents goes to everybody. So it's really written to the president. And even in like first person, it'll say, it'll reference you if they're talking to the president.
Okay.
So that's kind of like the basis of every policymaker's briefing. And so however many articles are in that, PDB briefing for the day will go to everybody who the president and the DNI want to see the PDB. And that happens Monday through Saturday, right?
Okay.
So it's almost a 24/7 business. Some and in fact many policymakers will take what they call like a drop book on the weekends, where they may read it as opposed to get like a full on briefing. And I can talk a little bit about timing of briefings as well. For example, I had 30 minutes with each of my customers every day, Monday through Friday, when I was briefing the Deputy Secretary of Defense and the USDI. And then when I moved up with the Secretary of Defense, I also would create a book, and that would be dropped off by me or one of my colleagues who was another briefer at the Pentagon on Saturday mornings. And so that's...
Yeah. So is it prepared, very consistently? Does it like have a template with certain subjects that are on there all the time? Is it bullet point? Is it narrative? I mean, if I realize you've already explained that, they're tailored. Okay. So I get that part. But if there is an average, is it 5 pages of bullet points? Is it 1 page? Is it 10 pages? And what topics, are included?
Sure. It's typically like short text form and paragraph, a few pages. The neat part is that we can now use tablets because technology has come a long way. And so there will often be like embedded graphics and that sort of thing to help illustrate the points that are made in the product. It still really does read, kind of like an article, but it's written with, analytic judgments up front, and then it's, sourced with evidence from various places that you could imagine that, intelligence collects evidence for. So it's not particularly long, and it varies by day, right? So things you would expect, and I can talk a little bit about like some of the things that have been, declassified and put out in the public. But it may be something that happened overnight. So for example, I can't tell you what was in the PDB on the 10th of September, 2001, frankly, because I don't know. But I could tell you what was on it. Really, I should say the 11th, because the morning that the briefings had probably already been given for the most part by the time 9/11 occurred. But I could tell you what was probably in it on 9/12. I'm going to guess that there was something to the effect of, here's an analytic document on what just happened yesterday. So there's those kind of things like, that take place overnight, for example, that we may want to get out there to our policymakers as soon as possible with as much information as we have. And, some of the really interesting parts of being an intelligence officer is, I'm an analyst by trade. And so, and I'll talk about like how many of, types of topics you have to follow as a PDB briefer. But when we do analysis, we bring, everything that we know about that subject to the forefront, and we will track those, those storylines, for lack of a better word. And as we get new information and new intelligence, that storyline or that analysis may change. And so one of the big important things that the entire intelligence community does, not just the CIA, is not only identify analysis, but how things change and why they change. And so kind of bringing that back to being a briefer, there were probably, I'm going to make a number up here, but like 15 to 17 different threads that are kind of major things. And you could probably imagine what most of those are, maybe countries that we're following or types of technologies that we're following. And when you come in as a briefer, you have to learn that bottom line that I kind of just discussed for all those stories all at once. And so some of the comparisons that briefers have made in the past are, it's like coming in and reading 15 graduate essays, like, every night. Or the one that I really liked, which was what my trainer said to me, is it's like coming in and trying to get up to speed on 15 different soap operas, right? Like you don't know who these characters are. You don't know what they're doing. You don't know why they're doing it. And so those first few months of being a briefer, it's like drinking from the fire hose.
That's really interesting, because I think when you and I talked before, didn't you mention to me that you're a believer in temperament assessments and those kinds of
like
things?
MBTI?
Yeah, like the
Yes.
MBTI. So
Yes.
for those who don't know, Myers-Briggs type indicator, but it's kind of I like calling it temperament versus personality, only because I view personality as a wider, broader topic than temperament. But anyway, so now you just gave me this picture, Stephanie, where okay, I'm reading, what'd you say, 10 to 15 college level essays a night, and now I've just got a nightmare about remember when they tested us in high school or even in middle school or junior high about comprehension?
Oh, yes.
You would read a paragraph, then they'd ask you questions.
Yes.
And and because I tend to look at things at 30,000 feet. So to comprehend the details in a paragraph, I really have to pay attention. I have the ability to do it, but words usually send me out into more words, not less words, right? That's the typical intuitive, right? The typical intuitive.
I was going to say, you're an in on the
Right,
S
right.
or
So I'm an intuitive, so I'm going to go wide,
Yeah.
versus narrow. So I would imagine that alone is one of the qualifying characteristics of a briefer, is they've got to be able to comprehend and remember details in it, because if you do banter back and forth with the customer, as you called him or her, you're going to look kind of silly when you go, gosh, I don't remember. It's in there. I don't remember. Just some machine gun questions here real quick. So what would be your guesstimate of how many people in our government receive a briefing of some sort?
Of the
From this
PDB or
document?
just from that document?
Yeah.
It really depends on the administration. I mean, if I had to guess, like you could look at or put a number out there, I guess you'd look at the president, his inner circle of people. So chief of staff, national security advisor. I would, you could, argue that probably every one of the cabinet members will get it. And again, it varies, by administration. And so you're going to typically though see the cabinet, the people that are sitting at the cabinet meetings are going to have seen that more than likely. So like, I know that's kind of a wishy-washy answer, but it really does change
So that sounds
from
like,
administration to administration.
yeah, that sounds like 12, 15, 20. What about senators, congressmen? I mean, certainly they must be briefed somehow, but are those different verticals, come from different sources? Is that?
So the PDB itself is like the very highest level echelon of,
Yeah.
what we collect and what we present. But from there, I think you kind of captured it well. There's like echelons, right? And so if there's a particular topic that a particular policymaker is interested, but they aren't a PDB recipient, as we call them, what may happen then is, they would go back to the agency or the IC and the DNI, and they would say, hey, we would like a briefing on XYZ topic. And what might happen is the PDB gets taken and, kind of expanded maybe to satisfy that policymaker. So let's say a PDB is 2 pages, for example, but this particular congressman or senator wants to know, like, all about this topic. It could be expanded into something that's more granular. I think, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I think it all intertwines together. And in the agency, we have, several different offices who cover different things, whether it's regional or topical. And so that it's a real communication process between, the briefers, the policymakers, the intelligence community, the agency being one of those 18 members of the intelligence community. Is that kind of what you were looking for?
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm imagining now that this is an important but one form of communication, because in one sense it's fast and consistent in that it's every 24 hours, X amount of days a week. Yet it's slow in the sense of national emergency. If something happened like now, we're not talking about briefing. I mean, that's probably a different form of communication. I would imagine going back upstream, then the analysts are they analysts? Are they researchers? They must all have assignments about different specifics. Maybe some are focused on the 50 states. Maybe some are focused on international concerns. Maybe some are focused on military. Would you say, I'm thinking about, if you were giving me a brief, would already know what I would prefer. And if it's like, do you think like the average is like 2 pages? Is that what you're saying?
Well, so the PDB itself is the same length no matter who gets it. It's written for the president and at that particular length.
Okay.
But in each book or in each, I should say briefing, I guess, for each customer that we have, that's going to be longer, because I think exactly what you said, each of those customers has a different portfolio, has different policy initiatives. And so if we'll use mine as an example. So when I briefed the Deputy Secretary of Defense, I would probably put somewhere between like 12 and 15 products in there every day. So you'd have, let's say there were 3 to 4 pieces in the PDB that the president gets. I would add another 8 or 10 pieces depending on the day. For example, if the deputy secretary, or when he became the secretary, was going to meet with a minister of defense from another country, I might put in some analysis on that particular leader and say, hey, here's what we know about, the person that you're going to meet with tomorrow, for example, or next week. We would do it a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah.
You might put things like raw intelligence to, maybe there's a really critical piece and it's like, hey, this source is really important. Let me put that source in there so that you can exactly read what that source said. And, that kind of bolsters our analysis.
So it almost feels like it's not so benign as just information, but it might also be, I don't want to go as far, because we'll talk about leadership here in a little bit, but it's almost sounds like it's kind of a coaching document too, if I'm willing to take it that way. I mean, with the example that you just gave, here's some more information about this meeting that you've got coming up. And, oh, okay, so now I'm going to be changing my posture perhaps, for this or that. I think, I'm trying to think of what kind of person I would be in receiving it. I think about how the Wall Street Journal and the USA Today has that column on the left, at least they used to, that were just the little snippets. And I used to love that, because I could get a global perspective really fast just by reading, as long as they weren't just hooks, if they were somewhat informative titles. And then I could land on the ones that I wanted to read and then, turn into that. But on the other hand, I could see myself, slamming down some breakfast while you're reading me the bullet points, and I go, oh, this back up.
There have been seasons in my life where I've looked back and I thought, what was that even about? Did I grow in that season? Did I get better? Am I still stuck in that season? If you have similar thoughts, I want to introduce you to a book called Story, The Art of Learning from Your Past. This book, written by Jim Piper, shares principles and stories that actually help us get unstuck and step into the future we've always wanted. Be sure to stop by leadtodaycommunity.com to grab your copy today.
I can see myself doing both of those. What other ways do some of the customers have you seen that they'd like to receive it?
So I'll answer that question, but I'll back up to the thing about coaching.
Yeah.
I would actually use the term, or the term that we use is that intelligence informs policymakers. We do not create policy.
Yeah.
Right. So what we're doing is trying to understand what the policymakers, desires are, and provide them as much analytic, objective information as we can, so that they can go make those policies. Since we don't, make policy. So I think that's the first part of it. The second part of the question is how you receive the briefing.
Yeah, wait, Stephen, let's back up. So here comes my intuitive, right?
Okay.
Here it comes. All right. I'm following you on that. And so, I remember that old detective show, the facts, just the facts. Yet a lot of times, let's see if this makes sense. A lot of times we have statements, we have leanings, we have maybe a variety of circumstantial ideas that seem to indicate something. So we're not going to say, here is what 1 + 1 + 1 equals, but do they sometimes list, here's the 1, and the 1, leaving the sum to the imagination and to more research. I mean, if it seems like something is brewing, how do you say that on a brief when you don't really know that it's brewing? Does my question make sense?
Yes, you've just basically kind of dug and jumped right into why intelligence analysis is so challenging.
Okay.
Okay, so that's exactly it. We live in a world of uncertainty and intelligence.
Yeah.
Like we don't know, we can't predict the future. We are not future tellers, right? Which, I think in my experience, the policymakers I've worked with have all understood that. They don't think we are, future tellers. But what they do want is for us to take, the information that we have, and intelligence and information, that you mentioned both of those words. Those are also two very different things. Information's just data. And if you just have data and you don't do anything with it, it's not analysis, it's not intelligence. And so what we're doing is taking all that data and we are actually analyzing it, and we're saying, based on all of these things, and it's going to come from lots of different sources, historical, everything that we know about a specific topic, and we're going to analyze that, and we're going to make our best analytic judgment, and then we're going to support that with evidence. And that's what we're going to present to the policymakers. And it's funny, right before our call, I was working on an essay, evaluating an essay, and saying just that, like, hey, when I coach, I know we'll talk about leadership and coaching and some of the other things I do, but when I coach my students, I always say, we have this thing we call like the arc of the story. So you basically start with, what do we know, right? So what are the facts? Like you said, kind of just the facts, man, right? But then, why is this happening? How is this happening? Who are the players, right? That's kind of the second phase. The third is what is the impact so far? What happened? And then what can we visibly see or discern from what is going on right now? And then there's the really hard part. And this is interesting. You talk about MBTI because, right, you never would use MBTI to like hire or fire, but I used to teach leadership and critical thinking, writing, and briefing. And we would partner people that have complementary MBTI types, and they work even better together. So typically, I'm an ISFJ, right? And so I am really strong at data, right? I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm really good at that. What's happened? Why is it happening? What have we seen so far? That really tangible stuff.
You're an ISFJ?
ISFJ.
Okay, got it.
Now, my friends that are like NPs, they can, you're intuitive, right? And so they can look out at what we call the last two parts of the arc of the story, which is our outlooks and our implications. So, okay, so now we know what's going on. We think we know why it is or how it is. Maybe we don't, but maybe we do. We can see what impact it's had. And so that in itself is very, important critical analysis. But then let's look at the outlook, and let's look at what does that mean for the future. And then let's look at those implications, particularly for US policy. And again, we don't create policy, but we would say, like a particular, event might, end up a certain way if, I'm trying to think of how we would word this without being policy. We call it policy prescriptive. So if you're telling a policymaker how to do their policy, that's a big no-no. That's policy prescription. We don't do that. Or politicization, right? But if we're just saying like, if you took this action, this adversary may react as such. We're just saying, like, and it's kind of similar to what we do in the military, right? Courses of action. So if you took course of action 1 or 2 or 3, then here would be the implications of courses 1 and 2 and 3. So we're not trying to give them like a menu to choose from per se, but we're trying to say, we're taking information, we're analyzing it, we're putting our intelligence, hats on, and we're going to tell you what we think that means, in the future.
I want to move on to the other topics, but I don't, because I'm still fascinated with this.
So maybe we do a part 2.
Yeah. I still need to take one more attempt at this question.
Okay.
So I'm going upstream again, right? And I'm trying to figure out, because when a president comes in, well, I guess some presidents, when they come in, they would be very informed about this briefing process. But others who maybe, and I know there's been few, but those that are on the outside who come in, they business people who come in and they go, oh, this is cool. They probably get some kind of briefing in their business world that it looks different. So if you go upstream far enough, I'm still trying to figure out who decides, because the president didn't create it. Who decides what we're studying? How do they gather the information? Who decides what gets into this original, brief? Is it synthesized through AI? Is there just a couple really good writers? I'm just trying to figure out, how does it not get corrupted somewhere through that process?
Okay, I'll try to answer those, maybe not in the same order. There's hundreds of authors. It really is a community product. So historically, the PDB was published by the CIA, but following 9/11, I'm going to read this. I actually wrote it down in one of my notes. Intelligence Reform and Terrorism Protection Act, IRTPA, possibly one of the worst acronyms, but a very important act. It was passed in 2004. And that took a lot of things from what was then called the Director of Central Intelligence, which was one hat that the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency wore. So they were both the Director of the agency as well as the Director of Central Intelligence. And they took those DCI roles and they gave them to the DNI. And I think that, I think so much goodness has come from that, because now the DNI focuses on the whole intelligence community, and that's a whole nother podcast probably altogether. But the CIA director, can focus on CIA and its equities, and so on and so forth. So I kind of give you the history of that to say, like, it's a community product, and it very much is. I mentioned intelligence is a relationship business. It very much is a partnership between the president and the DNI and the broader intelligence community. So when a new president comes in, for example, no matter what their experience is, whether they are a seasoned politician, whether they've come from something that's different, if they've come from business perhaps, they are going to have a transition period with the PDB office, and they are going to have those discussions to say, hey, President, Jane Doe or Joe Smith is, this is how they like to take their briefings.
We're getting closer to a Jane Doe.
Yeah. I just made those up. But yeah, so here is, let's say I come in as president. No, but like, hey, here's how I like my briefings. Like, I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to be focusing on, some of the more graphic products that you're going to provide, hopefully, to me. I'm going to ask a lot of, detailed questions. And so I would like to have a longer briefing. I want to make sure that, I understand everything that goes into your analysis and, what that means when I'm creating my policy. But I don't know if I'm explaining it well enough. I'm trying to kind of get around or get to the fact that it really is this partnership, and that it is very tailored to each president. Some presidents like to read first and then maybe get a briefing later, or maybe get one, a few times a week. Some presidents, want to, just get a briefing, or maybe something longer. I'll use my example, since I haven't actually briefed the president, although I did get to fly on Air Force One a few times, which was very cool.
That is cool.
One of my favorite parts.
You got to fly in Air Force One. That's awesome.
It was fantastic. I apologize for my ding. It's all my kids' alarms going off. But
did you get to eat on Air Force One? Was there food?
I did.
Wow.
Oh yeah, it was some. Oh my God, the chefs on Air Force One.
We could do a
are
podcast just
phenomenal.
on your experience in Air Force One.
I would love that. That would be amazing. But
Yeah, I'm hearing that there's a lot of cogs in the wheel,
oh yes.
and there's a lot of accountability. Um, and one question I had for you though about that before we move to leadership is, so how is this brief classified?
What do you mean? How is it
Well,
classified?
there's different levels of classification, isn't there?
Oh, it really depends on the data that's in it. It's
Okay.
going to change, based on the data. So every briefing or every product is going to have a different classification. But I think back to the question was, how do different people take their briefings? I can give you my experience with like the Deputy Secretary of Defense, for example. When I had him, he wanted a 30-minute briefing. He wanted to hear from me as the briefer what I had to say about not what I personally had to say, what the intelligence community had to say about a particular piece, as we call it. So let's say, remember, I said there was probably like 15 to 17 pieces. So I would give him, the bottom line up front. I would give him, the roadmap. Like, so this is our assessment, sir. These are the high points of this assessment. And then here's the evidence that supports each of those sub judgments. And kind of here's our conclusion. And so I do that for each piece. And I would have about 30 minutes with him every day, Monday through Friday. And, there were times when it'd be like, hey, I'm just going to give you the bottom line. And he might say, hey, okay, great. Got it. Thanks. Move on. Other times he may want everything in detail. And sometimes he was like, hey, I actually want to read that. But he was very much approached as a conversation. And I think a lot of customers do. But like I said, there are some customers, presidents and otherwise, that are readers and they want to read that, and they're completely visual learners, and that's how they take in information the best. And then after the fact, they can then ask the questions that they have, for example.
I think this is a fascinating thing when you look at the size of our country and the communication, super important, and it's neat to hear your story about that. And for the sake of time, I should probably transition, but I could probably keep you on this for another 2 hours trying to drill down my. So I'd like to transition by talking just a little bit about temperament and an observation. So as an ISFJ, there's different nicknames given to the temperament and the type. The one is a guardian as far as your temperament, and type, sometimes it's called protector, defender, moderator, those types of words. But your sensing and your judging tends to lean towards exactness, detail, black and white, if you will, using some slang, some street language, just to try to. And then introverted. And then your F is kind of interesting. It kind of softens the S and the J. I liken feelers as fond-hearted and thinkers as tough-minded. Not that um, feelers aren't logical. I mean, obviously, you're a rocket scientist, so you got to be pretty logical. I think you're abstract. Here's what I think is weird, is that I would think that in abstract thinking, you would probably not score super high yet. And I recognize that when you reverse engineer physics, it really is, it's logical. But some of us who are intuitives, we have a hard time getting down to that elevation, that perfection of detail, right? And so I really like what you said about surrounding yourself or teaming with complementary temperaments. I think you and I would probably be a pretty good team, because I sometimes test as an E, sometimes as an I. So that tells you. I think my true self is an I, but when I'm on mission, I probably look more like an E, but just a little bit, because I know what drains me, so I know I'm an introvert. And I'm definitely intuitive. I'm definitely a thinker, and I'm definitely, like you, a J, which, we would call that, if we go with the INTJ, which I think is my true self, we're talking about a rational and then a mastermind. So kind of like an architect, in that sense. But an architect doesn't cut every corner I'm looking at the molding in my studio. That would drive me nuts. Getting the detail of the molding cut right. I'll see it and criticize it, but I don't want to be, I don't want to be the guy that fixes it, you know? But it is fascinating, isn't it? How the creator made us very similar yet different, and where we need one another because we don't have everything that we need. But okay, so I'm thinking about here you are, you have excelled in education, you've excelled in engineering, you've excelled in this the roles that you've had with the CIA. You've traveled. You're a mom. You have traveled quite a distance, and now you have and you continue to study leadership. What are your initial thoughts about leadership? I mean, is it a real thing? Is it something that people can get better at? Should they get better at? I don't really know how to position the question,
Okay.
but what would you say that your core beliefs are about leadership, and let you go as high or as low as you'd like to be, because I think you probably have a lot to say about it.
Yes, I think. Um, I taught leadership for a long time. And so the first one of the questions, I'll just take them kind of as they naturally flow, is yeah, I absolutely believe that leadership can be taught. Like you, I am an I because I know what drains me, but I need to be an E and be on, I feel like all the time. And the types of jobs that
Yeah.
I've chosen that bring me joy. I think really, truly good leaders are doing things out of love and out of joy for what they do. Um, when I talk about, leadership, when I talk about my, like maybe even life philosophy, it's resilience, passion, and gratitude. And those are the three things that I live by. And in fact, I have a tattoo on the back of my arm that says resilience, passion, gratitude in Sanskrit that I got when I was, we'll leave my age out of it. I was old enough to understand what I was putting. It was only a few years ago. We'll leave it at that. Um, but that's really my personal mantra. I know I'm getting a little bit off the topic of leadership, but I think we're all whole human beings. And I think you can't necessarily take everything and compartmentalize it, which is probably funny to hear from an intelligence officer, because that's all we do is compartmentalize data and things. For example, the agency has this great wellness division, and I took a lot of classes that would ask us identify your core values or your themes. And those three things always came to the surface, right? Resilience, passion, and gratitude. And so, you know, I kind of, I'll kind of weave in some of my other interests. You talked in my bio about my yoga practice, right? That's really guided me through challenges and triumphs. And so, I think I've had a lot of achievements, and I think I just kind of can tie them all back to those three things. And I think back to the question, can leadership be taught? Absolutely, leadership can be taught, but you have to have something behind that. It's not just a set of rules. That's management. So I used to teach a class called, it was a first time supervisor course basically for all agency officers. So after I left the PDB briefing staff, I ran into an old friend and she's like, hey, what are you going to be doing when you're done briefing? She had briefed Condoleezza Rice for 2 years. And she was an amazing leader and an amazing mentor to me. And she said, what are you going to do next? And I was like, something that involves sleeping at normal hours. Because I know we didn't have time to get into it, but like as a briefer, I would get up at somewhere between midnight and 1 o'clock in the morning, go in about 2, be done about noon. Again, that could be a whole nother podcast probably, or 2 more hours of this one. But I said, I want something that brings me, some balance. And I also don't believe in work-life balance. Okay, I believe in work-life balance, but I think it's a little different than sometimes people portray it. I think there's going to be parts or positions in your career where you're going to be completely and totally like wedded to your work. For example, when I was a PDB reefer, and I had a lot of time for my family, but what fell off was my health. Now, while I was a briefer, I was in fantastic shape. Like I ran 4 times a week, 5 miles. I ate well. I had my friends. I was very structured and very routine, which I think also can be very, for at least whether it's my MBTI type or my personality, very effective in my life. It's what's made me successful, like having that routine. So get up, go to work, get off at noon, have some time to myself. I had my kids from 3 to 6 every day. Then they would go to their dad's house, and then I would go to sleep and like rinse and repeat. But what I also did was only sleep 5 hours a night. And that is not a sustainable thing. And so when I was asked, what do you want to do next? I'm like, I want a job where I can sleep. I need to find that balance. So I was asked to come over and stand up or help to stand up our first time supervisor class that we had for across the whole agency. That was the first time we'd ever had a supervisor class go across all of the directorates of the CIA. We've always had kind of like stovepipe directorate leadership classes, which were all very phenomenal. But this was an attempt to kind of like, let's bring everybody in there and back to that community building. As an analyst, I went through an analytic training program where I'm still, in touch with several of those friends from 22 and a half years ago. And we kind of grew up through the analytic core of the agency together. Now we're trying to do that across our management core. And how do we get all of these officers to kind of grow up together? So like if, 5 years down the line, you're like, oh, I'm working on XYZ project and I know this person over here can really be helpful to that. And so now I know and I can go and find that person. So, I've kind of gone a little bit off track on my, I guess, values and how I see life. But that was to me the next level of balance. And there, unfortunately, it was 2019. So 2020, right? COVID came. Not as much balance as I would have hoped for. But I got myself into a job where it was fairly much an 8 to 5 job. So I could leave at the end of the day and not have to worry about, is my DNI phone going to ring? Am I going to have to go into the office at 10 o'clock at night, or, stay until like 3 o'clock in the afternoon after I've been there since midnight, and to a place where I could focus more on my health and even more on my children while still getting the job satisfaction that I wanted and still being able to be a leader in the organization. And I think, anybody who knows me knows, like, I just rave about the agency. I absolutely love it. It's been the most amazing career. It's very hard to believe that I am retiring very, very soon. But, we do a good job of supporting our officers in their career, wherever they are. It's like kind of we try to meet people where they are. And when I taught that leadership class with my colleagues, our team tried to, I think, instill that in our officers, like, lead from where you are, meet your people where they are as well.
That's good. I wrote down the 3 values that you shared with us, and just again using my imagination, I kind of see gratitude as probably the fuel for your other 2 values. It's just such an important. It's an important thing. The next book I'm working on, the working title I have right now is either Reimagining Leadership or The Reimagined Leader. And it's basically laid out in 3 dimensions: person, people, and place. Really trying to create a little bit of differentiation and isolation, not necessarily a linear idea, but just to step back out of our lives for a little bit and realize that the center, if you imagine 3 encompassing circles, I don't know if that's the right word. You probably being a physics expert can give me the right word, but I'm thinking kind of like of a dartboard, right? And so you got the bullseye in the middle, and I label that person. That's my person. That's your person. And there's certain things that I need to do to take care of that person. And then the next encompassing circle is people. And one of the key principles I believe there is we have to choose our people very, very carefully. We don't have the capacity to say, come one, come all. I think it was Aristotle who said, somebody who is a friend to all is a friend to none. I think that's true in a lot of things in life. It takes focus. Then that last circle is place. That's the context of my life. It's the season that I'm in. It's the workplace. It's what have you. But I've noticed that for me, leadership's an inside out proposition. And so though it's not linear, if I want to change something, it's got to start with me. I'm not saying this to be agreeable because I'm not that kind of a person. I'm also not argumentative, but I cannot agree with you more when you said you do not believe in work-life balance. I don't know what that is. A farmer works his tail off putting the seed in the ground, and then he gets a break. And then the farmer works his tail off harvesting the crops. There are times where the calling of leadership is to go above and beyond, and there's no such thing of work-life balance. And then there's a time for rest and reflection. And yeah, you'll get some time, you'll get some months here and there where it'll feel like you have found balance. But that's, when you find out you have cancer, where's the good, where's the work-life balance there? It's called attack, and or whatever your method is. I really like those three values, Stephanie. Those are powerful. I also like what you said earlier. I never really thought about it this way before, but I think you inferred, implied, or maybe or even stated it more as a principle that as a leader, you really got to love and have joy for what you're doing, probably to have any chance of being a good leader. A lot of times we create goals, but we don't spend enough time, which is usually the what, right? But we don't spend enough time thinking about the why underneath that goal. Why is
Mm.
an important goal? So many goals we've adopted from society that really isn't our goal. But it's
Mhm.
projected upon us, by our loving and well-meaning parents. It's by friends, by, here's the next step, here's the next step. And that's not always the case. Well, you mentioned that you're going to be retiring here in the near future from the CIA.
Yes, I am from federal service after 27 and a half years.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
So what are your aspirations after that? You're not the kind of person that's going to sit by the pool and drink umbrella drinks the rest of your life, I don't think.
Maybe for a few months.
You know what? It's so funny that you said that, because I told one of my clients about, I don't know, 6 months ago, he's kind of in that place in his life. And I told him, we'll call him Bob. I said, Bob, I don't see you as the kind of guy who is just going to retire and just, relax, play golf or whatever. He pauses, he looks at me and goes, well, dang it, Jim, I think I'd like to give it a shot. Well, are you thinking about, okay, I can understand you're taking a season off, but
Yeah.
what are you thinking about?
So yeah, so I will disclose my age and give you a few remarks that came from my retirement speech a few weeks ago here at the War College. So I tell people I'm retiring at 48, and they're like, "Whoa!" Like a lot of times it's like, "Lucky you," but there's a mix of shock and real curiosity. Like, you're
Yeah.
too young. What will you do with yourself? And I said in there, I said, well, my answer is really simple. I'm going to focus on the four not so little people in my life, the children that you mentioned at the beginning in my bio. They're my world. I'm going to spend more time on my health, running, practicing, and teaching yoga and gratitude. But I'm also really excited about like the future. There's so many things I want to do when I grow up, is what I say, right? I want to attend a culinary school.
Oh,
I
wow.
want to write. I want to write a memoir on resilience. I think, I think I have an interesting story, and I think I have some things that I would like to share. I really would love to open a wellness center in Northern California dedicated to helping veterans and civilians who are working through PTSD.
Mm.
So like I have so many of these, opportunities that I want to explore and make hopefully some, if not all of them, a reality. In the short, I guess in the short term, those are more some of my long-term goals. I want to get more involved in my community, more involved with the policy center that I mentioned. I actually have just signed up to be a substitute teacher when I retire at the local schools to which my children were mortified. And one even remarked, you can probably guess which one, it was the high school junior. He said, if you show up in my class, I'm calling in sick. And I'm like, I don't think you can call in sick from school for that reason, but okay.
Well,
Like
I
in
don't
another
know.
local school.
Nowadays nowadays there's a
Yeah.
lot of things we could probably do. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm working towards trying to continue working with the senior service schools. I'm obviously not just passionate about gratitude for veterans and addressing some of the more challenging things like PTSD, but I think I love supporting all of our military and civil service members. It's that has been my world. And we probably were running out of time, but I have a story to tell, like about how I, kind of came to be in the government, and it has to do with my grandparents and, kind of being semi-raised by my grandfather, who was in Army Air Corps and eventually, joined the Air Force. And so I think like the world is my oyster, and I kind of, again, I want to stick with a lot of what I've done for the Army War College and and the other service schools, maybe working in their distance programs, staying on hopefully as an adjunct. Yeah, so many possibilities. But at the end of the day, we're retiring here where the Army War College is in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, because it really just offers such an amazing community. I had the opportunity to go back to DC, and I was like, it's so crowded. There's so many people. There's so much traffic. It's so expensive. I have so many friends there. There's so many wonderful things. But this has really become, this has really become our world. Speaking of, there's my high school junior coming down the stairs.
Well, let me say this. I was right. You're not going to retire. You're gonna do something different. Just one more fun question. So
Sure.
where in Northern California?
I love the Bay Area.
Okay.
It's one of the only places I feel like that I've ever been in the world, and I've been all over the world.
Yeah.
That you can be at the, depending on where you live, right? You can be at the beach or in the mountains within an hour,
That's true.
right? So yeah, and I mean, I have, friends that are like family out there, up in the northern area. I have family who are also friends down in the southern part of California, right? And so, while I didn't grow up there, we spent quite a bit of time in Southern California growing up, and I've spent a lot of my time in Northern California between, very close friend and also spending time out there with work. So when I worked for the Navy, we had a contractor out there. I would go probably every 6 or 8 weeks, and just fell in love with the Bay Area, Monterey in particular. The other story I always tell, and I told it at my retirement here, is that I didn't pick Carlisle. So I think like sometimes the universe or whatever your value system, is kind of maybe, I don't want to say picks for you, but part of my leadership philosophy that I didn't really talk to too much is that I always tell my students, or I'm a leadership coach. I always tell people I'm coaching, like, never say no to an opportunity. Right. And so, I didn't apply for this job. Right. I say this, to a lot of people. I'd actually accepted a position at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, which had been my dream job for years, and about 7 years. And, I say I picked out a house overlooking the Pacific Ocean and Carmel. 6 months later, there's a budget cut, and California's not in the cards anymore. And so I was offered what my then supervisor called a better place, which was Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And before I could stop my inside voice from becoming my outside one, I said, "Have you looked at a map?" Right, like Carlisle, Pennsylvania, Monterey, California. Right. I don't know that I'd make that comparison, but what I say is never say no to an opportunity unless you have a compelling reason. Maybe someone sees something in you that you don't. Maybe there's an opportunity you never dreamed of. For me, this move to Carlisle became the best choice for my kids and for my career. And so I'll, be forever grateful to, whatever that was, whether it was the universe or, the agency or all of those things really that came together to bring me here and to give my family this opportunity. And we may not stay here forever, but it's an awfully great place to raise a family. So.
Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show. I would like to have you back, and there's all kinds of other questions I'd like to explore with you. You have that kind of mind that if you're willing to take the punches, I would love to ask you all kinds of questions.
I would love that, Jim. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the Today Counts show. We got so much more planned for you. So stay tuned and stay connected on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and subscribe on YouTube. And remember, today counts.